Hello, I'm Mark Tucker.
Hey there, I'm Alan Furstenberg, and we are Two Voice Devs.
Hey, Two Voice Devs, Alan, welcome.
Welcome. Good to see you, Mark.
Yes, it's been kind of crazy. We're going to talk about something today that's been scheduled for a while
A
now.
year.
Yeah, so it's been a kind of a heads up for those of us that have done Google Actions. Do you want to kind of walk us through a little bit of what's going on?
Sure. So let's start by cutting right to the chase. A year ago, Google announced that they're going to be discontinuing or sunsetting the portion of Google Actions known as Conversational Actions. And this is what, yeah. Hmm. And this is what those of us that have been working with Actions on Google for the past 5 years
Right.
are probably most familiar with. These are the actions that are similar to Alexa skills that you can invoke from a smart speaker, you can invoke from a phone, you can invoke from a smart display,
Yeah.
that work with network-based applications. And um, effective Tuesday the 13th, those have been discontinued. So that's kind of the status of what certainly for 3 years on this show and for five
Yeah.
years for developers has been the core of what we've been talking about um, for the Google Assistant side of things. And it's we've known this day was coming even before it was formally announced. That kind of the writing was kind of on the wall, but it's still hard to deal with. Change, as fast paced as technology can be sometimes, uh change is difficult at other times, and it's
Yeah.
it's sad to see a major piece of technology go away.
Yeah, one of the things I was really excited about when I first started, and specifically when I was first starting working with the Jovo framework, was the ability to write code once and be able to reuse it or reuse a majority of that code across platforms. A platform being an Alexa skill or a Google action. At that time, it was Dialogflow, which was the technology that you use to build conversational actions. And later that turned into actions on Google, which was another approach to doing that. But the idea is that kind of your core functionality, both of them require intents. It changes utterances into intents, which could have slots slash entities in them. You could execute code, return what the response was, and a lot of that same thing kind of functioned across. There were some platform specific, like Alexa specific things, how you do account linking or other things that you would do based on what kind of what you were writing for. But you could basically work in such a way that you could develop a game or a voice app and release on both platforms, pretty much at the same time. And that was kind of like a big approach. I took advantage of it for a number of games, and as I worked on client projects at the different companies I worked at, then we were able to kind of release the same functionality across both platforms, and that was kind of a big deal.
It was, I think one of the notable things to think about is not just you're writing code that can deploy across these different platforms, but where that code lived
Yeah,
was in the cloud. It was very
yeah,
much the equivalent of a web app, or what we would think of as a website or a web app, or something along those lines. So making changes was in many ways far simpler. You really just
yeah,
needed to redeploy to the website, or at most it meant changing certain phrases, deploying those to the the platform specific side and changing their back end. Um, it didn't require making sure things got distributed through an app store.
Right.
And certainly, both of us come from a web background. That's a very, very comfortable space to be in,
Yes.
especially when you're trying to develop things at a fast pace. You're constantly pushing out new stuff and understanding things better and revising and pressing forward. So that's a really comfortable place to work in.
Yeah.
And fortunately, both platforms cater to that. And I think it was the right choice for the time.
Yeah.
Certainly for platforms that were rapidly evolving, trying to write apps that were keeping up with that rapid evolution would have been difficult.
Yes. Yeah, I would agree. And new devices were coming out, started out with smart speakers, then smart displays. Um, and so there were
Yeah,
just lots of different,
right.
and really kind of during that phase, it was all about trying to get as many devices into consumers' homes as possible. Um,
And I think that's one of the in some ways one of the failings of both platforms is that they were focusing on trying to get more devices in rather than trying to get more applications in. So
yeah.
while I think, and we've seen this on both platforms, I think there was certainly some effort and understanding that part of the success of the platform was going to be the third party apps that were out there. Neither group really understood everything that was necessary to do that. And this was the pitfall of having this model, is that having to rebuild the entire structure of a Play Store and advertising
Right.
and all of that, all of those mechanisms for a brand new platform is a lot of work.
Yeah, and a lot of consumers didn't realize that there were, skills out there, that there was a skill store, or even sometimes even finding the action store was difficult to figure out where to even find that. So kind of to um, realize that there was this other thing that you could do. It was just like, oh, I asked my device to do such and such, and it doesn't. And there was kind of this fuzzy line. I think Google did a better job with announcing the actions and kind of using an intro into the action and then an outro and even different voices
Yeah,
to signify like you are leaving the main assistant experience, you're going into an app, now you're leaving the app. Whereas um, Alexa's idea, where Amazon focus was like, Alexa, these are skills. These are things that Alexa knows now.
right.
And it was really a lot more fuzzy. It's like, well, then I talked to Alexa and I asked something, and I get an answer of like what the weather is or what time it is, or setting a timer. That works fine. But then I have to sometimes remember to ask to start a specific app. But it would then use Alexa's same name that you had, or
Right.
same voice that you had configured, and there was no introduction. So it was a kind of this fuzzy line of like, well, what's it really Alexa's doing? What are third party and
Yeah, no, I think this is an important distinction, and I come at it with a little bit of bias, but I think this is
yeah,
one of the things that Google did correctly was say that the apps are different than the assistant experience itself, and to make that a clear transition. You weren't
right,
teaching the assistant a new skill, you were giving the assistant a new action that it could hand off to.
right, yeah,
And I think those, the way I like to equate it is that both companies kind of reverted back to what they were good at and what they were used to. Google, very, very good at the web. It understands sending people somewhere else.
yes,
That's what search was all about,
yeah,
was sending people to another web page. And that was kind of reflected as part of actions. That's what actions were. You were
mhm,
sending people to an action. Whereas Alexa was good at having a store that people would buy things from. That's what Amazon was really good at. And, so in a way, they were more selling an app, they were selling an extension of Alexa. even if that was offered by somebody else. And again, if we think of Amazon, Amazon's very good at selling stuff that looks like it's coming from Amazon, but is really being fulfilled by a third party.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to see how the two companies kind of then went and built an assistant platform that mirrored those two companies. And like I said, I think it was, it felt to me like a lot of what Google did with the actions on Google platform in general kind of was building on top of things that were there to some extent. They didn't go and reinvent brand new things.
Right.
They built on top of existing things, and contrasting that with how Alexa chose to do things. So Google went and built on top of Dialogflow. So most initial users were using a platform that had existed already, even if most people weren't aware of it or familiar with it.
Right.
It was a company they had bought called API.ai. They built on top of that to add the voice capabilities that we would find in Assistant, and continue to build it from there. When Google went to build a rich graphical interface, they didn't go build a brand new presentation language like Amazon did. They went and said, we have HTML because we have one of the most popular browsers that's built on top of it already. We can do this.
Yes.
When they went to build rich audio experiences, they, instead of building a new audio experience language, they took SSML and built on top of it. And I feel like, we see those same kind of patterns over and over with conversational actions and actions on Google that I think was wise.
Do you remember the time where they were like part of the race was like how many different devices? I remember looking at different charts and things from voicebot.ai, and they were like, and there's so many devices, or it was kind of wasn't ever exact, but you kind of got an idea of like percent market share of devices. But there was also this race of the number of apps. I know that was really big for a while. It's like there's 3,000 skills in the Alexa skill store. There's 4,000. There's 10,000. There and that was something that they were touting, and I don't know. I always kind of got the feeling that there weren't that same number of actions in the action store. Is that?
Well, part of it is that it was difficult to measure because Google at some point for the actions, they called it an actions directory because you didn't actually need to install anything first.
Right.
So you didn't need to go to the directory, but you could, because what they listed in there included a lot of things that were not conversational actions. So, for example, listed in there was every audio stream that you could get through the Google Assistant, which is kind of pushing it. Let's be fair there. Or, every podcast that was available through Google Podcasts was also an action because you could get it through the Google Assistant.
Okay. So they weren't all third-party actions.
Yeah.
Or there weren't like something that developers would specifically create.
Not in the sense of what we would think of, and again, both sides have kind of blurred this line over the years.
Yeah.
Google now has made it kind of clear by calling it a conversational action and killing it. Whereas Alexa, we'll talk about third-party skill experiences, but some of them are made through their audio streaming kit. Some of them are made through, new radio station kits. Some of them are, built on top of, their question system, or I'm blanking on the term.
You're thinking about blueprints?
Blueprints, thank you. So all of these are, and there are other things that are not strictly what we as developers would call a skill that we developed.
Right.
and yet are still skills. And, in some ways that makes sense. As developers, we like to be purists, but it really boils down to what is the consumer. It's the consumer interacting with something that's the important bit here.
Yeah, that's true.
No, where I thought you were going to go when you were talking about that was thinking about the race where they were advertising, here's how many languages you can now support your
That
skills
was
in.
that was a different another race as well. There
Yeah.
was, getting devices out there. There were the number of different languages that you could speak to the device with, and then there was this kind of this race as far as apps. And I had forgotten about it until we started talking about it again, just because I haven't done anything with Google Conversational Actions for a while now. I think once they announced it a year ago that it was going away, I think any interest in creating something new or maintaining something really kind of went out the window. But I had forgotten temporarily that every action had to have a unique name.
Yes.
And that kind of goes back to the way it started out with Alexa is that you could have, 20 cat jokes, and they could all be called cat jokes. And because originally you had to pick which one you were going to enable, and then when you invoked, cat jokes or whatever, I'm just making something up, then it would go ahead and pick the one that you had enabled. Now, at some point in time, they stopped requiring you to have to explicitly enable a skill before you used it, but then that got confusing as far as now you had duplicate
And the naming
named things.
conflicts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
No, and again, that's one of the, I think, again, I'm biased. I'll admit my bias.
yeah,
I think that was one of the wise choices from Google. In the same way that domain names needed to be exclusive, invocation names being exclusive kind of makes sense on some level, because otherwise you start getting that kind of confusion.
yeah,
And I think they were trying to lower the barrier to using the actions as much as they could
yeah,
for something that already had a kind of high friction
yeah,
to get going. You need to know about these things somehow, and that was the challenge. And I think that's, in some ways, that's part of what ultimately doomed it, was that they didn't require the place. I think there were a number of things that doomed it. You know, that it had a directory but didn't require the directory. I think there were a bunch of people inside Google that were treating it as if it was a Play Store model app when it wasn't. And I think Google didn't need another platform to support. They already had a very, very rich platform with Android.
right,
And there was certainly some question about why do we have another platform that's doing many of the same things? Why can't we just repurpose this platform? And that's the road they're going. Again, I'll admit my bias. I think it's a mistake. And I'll say that here. I think they're doing all the wrong things for all the right reasons. On the surface saying, hey, we have Android. It has an incredibly rich set of APIs. Let's make sure that people can write voice apps on Android, and it'll run on Android devices, and it'll run on all of these other devices. And on the surface, that seems great. The problem is they don't have a smart display running Android. They have a tablet now that's running Android, which will act like a smart display, but that device is 4 times the price of their current smart displays. I think one of the beauties of being able to run things in the cloud is that the device itself can be cheaper.
yeah,
You can pick up a home mini or a dot for $25, and that makes it really easy to put them all around your house.
right,
You could pick up a cheap smart display for $100, and that's cheap enough to put in a couple of important locations around the house.
right, yeah.
You're not
So
going to pick up multiple $400 or $500 tablets.
no, yeah. So I guess, what do you see for the existing, devices, that were, because they can still run, I guess, first party experiences. You can still ask the weather and set a timer and
Yeah.
play music and stuff. Do you see that there's going to be a future with that? Do you think that it could circle back to doing third party type actions, some flavor of that in the future, or do you think this is just
So
kind of going to die off?
there are two elements that confuse me, and I think they confuse everybody when dealing with these devices these days. They're more than two. There are several things that
One star. No.
are confusing folks when it comes to the smart devices these days. The first is they are just completing an upgrade to the operating system for all the smart displays. So all the smart displays used to be running uh, a variant of the Chromecast operating system, and now they're all running Fuchsia. And this is the first real major deployment of Fuchsia in Google's environment.
Mhm.
And nobody outside Google anyway seems to quite understand why they did this. What was the advantage of putting a lot of resources into moving the platform to Fuchsia? Nobody seems to know right now, and Google isn't talking. So there's certainly the possibility that at some point they'll come around and say, hey, if you want to develop for a Fuchsia device, here's how you do so. That's one possibility.
Mhm.
Another possibility that's been hinted at recently in a couple of different places and different ways, none of them directly tied to the assistant, but hinted in a couple of other places, is the ability to run something on your phone and have it echoed to another device. So last year, for example, and we talked about this a little bit on the show when I talked about the latest generation of glass, which by the way has also been killed. That one of the features that it had was to be able to run things on the phone and have it controlled and displayed to the glass. If you can kind of picture that with a smart display, you walk in your house and now your smart display, when you talk to it, does the voice identification against your phone, does all of the processing locally on your network against your phone. That reduces the latency, reduces the load on Google servers, which they were, happy about.
Yeah.
But still keeps that kind of third-party functionality alive. So that's a second interesting tidbit that's floating around there that Google hasn't said anything about, but makes you go, The third is that Google and Amazon and Apple and a bunch of others are all big backers of the Matter protocol and the thread networking protocol underlying it. That technology requires a local hub to do a lot of the local smart device communication and control, a lot of the local smart device control, so that on your phone you can say turn on the light. It talks to the Matter hub that's on your local network that actually does the work. So what used to be done in the cloud, both Amazon and Google used to run these servers, which would be the ones controlling your local appliances. That's now moved to a local device. The problem is Google's local devices that support this are all of their smart displays and smart speakers, not the tablet. So unless you have a Google wireless router, Google relies on the home hub and the home devices to do Matter work. So they need these devices, but they've just nerfed features on them. So that's it feels like they've got to do something with these devices to keep people buying them and using them, but it's not clear what.
All right. Well, that will be interesting. Definitely, we will pay attention to the news there, and if something changes, we will talk about that. Um, but what are you most sad, I guess, to see go with this? I've I've got a specific combination of a voice game that I created called Snatchword, and I was really excited about it because I could you could speak to it with either a Google action or an Alexa skill, and you could actually play the same game. And people across multiple countries that spoke English and across multiple different platforms, Google and Alexa, you could all show up on the same leaderboard. And in fact, you get had a little icon with a G or an A next to your name and the little flag for what country, and you could see how people were playing. And I was really excited about that functionality. And then and I'm sad to see that go. I thought that was really kind of a cool, hadn't been done before type of thing on a voice platform, but now that's going to go away.
Yeah, no, I think like you, the what I will be most sad to see go is one of my actions. Voodoo Drive was one of the first things I built. It's one that I use multiple times a day. And it dovetailed really well with actions on Google because it was modifying things on Google Drive. So it made it a lot easier for me to deal with authentication and
Yeah,
account linking. All of that, was nicely bundled together. So I resisted for a long time having to put in the work to move it to Alexa. And I did, I haven't gotten around to it, unfortunately. I had a lot of other things that have come up.
yeah,
So I'm already missing those features that I had accessing Voodoo Drive.
right.
And I think even beyond that, I miss the potential that was there. I really feel like Google had so much potential to do really, really awesome things with the platform. And now they're 4 years behind. App actions they're not the same. The notion of voice control of an Android app is only marginally there. I think it's a logical idea, but it's not there yet. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done to bring it there, and Google has not yet done that work. And I think partly why is up until recently, they didn't see a need. Most uses of smart displays and speakers and on the phone were one-shot deals. They were instructions to turn on and off lights. They were simple requests for the weather. You didn't have complicated conversations.
Yeah,
And those could be well handled by app actions. And for everything else, you were launching an app, which is what people were used to. I don't think they anticipated conversational AI and how people were really interacting with conversational AI. And they're behind on that front when it comes to voice right now because of it.
yeah. How do you think the kind of the recent push in open AI and artificial intelligence in general, and kind of a resurgence of generative AI and chatbot stuff? Guess how do you see that matching up with this decision for conversational actions to go away?
I think it I think I'm hemming and hawing on this one for a number of
Yeah,
reasons. And it's because I don't really know what's going on inside of Google on this front. I know that, for example, the Dialogflow team will be releasing stuff soon. They've kind of announced some of it, talking about how Dialogflow will be working with generative AI. And that shows some interesting promise. On the other hand, Dialogflow is no longer, Google Assistant. They're very, very different worlds at this point.
Right.
I think one of the things that we saw coming out of I/O is that the Android world does not yet understand conversational AI. They don't understand conversational AI. They don't understand generative AI. They're still very much focused on some very specific needs from their users, which I can appreciate. Their users are demanding larger and different form factors. They're demanding things like a tablet, things like a foldable phone, and they need to respond to those needs. So I can appreciate
Yeah.
that.
Mhm.
On the other hand, I think we demonstrated a long time ago the value of conversational systems and the value of audio. And Google does have a set of wireless earbuds that you'd think would do, they would be eager to have the assistant play a bigger role with them. And yet they haven't, like Apple and Amazon have
Yeah.
with their earbuds. So I don't know. I don't understand why Google did not see this coming, but they didn't. And because of that, they're slow to react. The Android product lifecycle is set by year. So they couldn't, and the conversational AI space kind of leapt up in the middle of this cycle.
Yeah.
So they're not going to be able to really react to it until next year. That said, I think next year's Android will have a lot more of the generative AI and the conversational AI built into it. And I hope we truly see that reflected through the assistant. And we get more of what's coming, of what we as developers would expect for a full voice first conversation experience, not just a voice forward conversation experience.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's good. That was a tough question. So thanks for
These are, one of the things I guess in many ways I'm glad about is that I'm not a PM at Google. It's really easy some days for me to take pot shots from outside.
yeah.
It's really easy for me in, my chair with my perspective to say, oh, Google should have done this instead. That's really easy. It's really easy to be a critic. You ever see Ratatouille?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. The finals, one of the final scenes, it's really easy to be a critic. We don't, we're not doing the work.
Yeah.
That said, it's not clear to me why Google did not see some of this coming when, at least in hindsight, well, let me put it this way. In hindsight, certainly we can point to mistakes they made. The catch is that we were also pointing these things out as they were not happening. So, it was easy to take the pot shots,
Yeah.
but we were right. And I take no great joy in saying that, to be honest.
Yeah.
But it's tough. It's tough to steer a large ship like Google, and it's tough to make the calls. And like I said, I think they made the wrong choice, but they made it for the right reasons. So, I know that you have also been, you've done a lot of work with actions. You've done a lot of work with skills. Where do you see tools like Jovo going now that, one big part of the multi-platform base is gone?
Yeah, I think it's going to be fine. I think yes, while that portion of Google Actions is not something that is going to be used in the Jovo platform anymore in the framework. There is kind of a resurgence of chatbots. You can use Jovo for writing chatbots. You can use them for writing custom voice assistants that could be hosted on web or could be hosted in mobile. So I think the way that Jovo was architected, it was done in such a way that platforms were just another plugin. And I think that was a really smart approach. We're up to version 4 of Jovo, and there's been a number of refinements over the different versions to get to this point where the platforms pretty much are just plugins as well. So I think it's a smart choice on the architecture, and I think they'll be just fine. There's plenty of other text-based or voice-based, kind of conversational or interactive experience that their framework will work just fine on.
Good. It's always good to see these companies that it's always tough for companies who are kind of relying on a platform
Yeah,
to be there when the platform suddenly goes away.
right. Well, you just think of like all the hundreds of hours that were spent likely to get that Google functionality inside of Jovo to begin with, and have that become a first-class citizen with all the different features that are available. And now that section is not going to be used anymore.
Yeah. So I think we're sad to see conversational actions go.
Yep.
I think it's going to be some dark times, at least for a little bit, but hopefully we'll see something, and it'll be interesting to see what that something is.
Yeah. No, yeah, I don't think we've seen the last of voice technology, and definitely not the last of voice technology coming out of Google. So there'll be something, and we'll definitely have to take a look to see where that goes. I think Amazon as well is reevaluating their approach and taking these last 6 months into mind to decide how the future might go for them as well. So there's going to be changes ahead, and it's kind of interesting. It kind of feels like we've gone through a different phase as a voice developer. I've been doing this for 7 years now or something like that, and just to see how things have changed, and all right, that phase is gone, and let's see what the next generation is going to be.
Yep. And love to hear folks' take on where they think the next generation is, and where things should be going. And all of this stuff, as it happens, we'll be covering on Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs. Take care, Alan.
You too, Mark. Have a good week.
You too. Bye.
Sorry, Two Voice Devs is no longer available.